The Galactic Federation's flagship, Varkan Prime, was supposed to be the most advanced warship in the galaxy. It was massive, a floating fortress armed with the deadliest weapons and protected by the most sophisticated defenses known to the universe. But right now, the ship faced no enemy fleets or rebel uprisings. Its greatest threat was dirt. The ship's systems were failing. Sensors were malfunctioning. Weapons misfired. The cloaking device flickered in and out of existence. Engineers worked day and night, but no one could figure out the cause. It was chaos. And so, in desperation, the Federation did something they never thought they would. They hired a human janitor. When Jack Carter arrived on the Varkan Prime, the crew stared at him in disbelief. Humans were considered primitive, barely out of their own solar system. The idea that one of them could help fix a ship this advanced felt like a bad joke. Jack didn't seem bothered by their judgment. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his early 30s, with rolled-up sleeves and a calm, focused demeanor. He didn't waste any time. The moment he set foot on the ship, he got to work. Armed with his cleaning tools and an almost frightening sense of purpose, he attacked the dirt and grime like it was his mortal enemy. He wiped down control panels until they gleamed, scrubbed air ducts no one had even looked at in decades, and climbed into maintenance tunnels most engineers were too afraid to enter. At first, the crew watched him with curiosity. Then curiosity turned to horror. Jack's cleaning was thorough. Too thorough. He dismantled entire sections of the ship just to scrub behind them. He cleaned vents so aggressively that air started flowing more efficiently than ever before. And then the really strange things started happening. Hidden compartments were suddenly revealed. Weapons caches that no one was supposed to know about vanished. Secret stashes of illegal tech disappeared overnight. Entire storage areas were emptied of contraband and lost supplies, all because Jack's relentless cleaning uncovered them. The aliens began whispering among themselves. Was this human some kind of spy? Or was his obsession with cleanliness hiding something far more dangerous? The rumors grew when the ship's stealth systems failed entirely. Jack had cleaned the quantum cloaking generator so thoroughly that its delicate balance was disrupted. Now, instead of being invisible, the Varkan Prime lit up like a beacon on every enemy scanner in the sector. The crew panicked. Enemies would see them. They would attack. And all because of a janitor. But Admiral Krextall, the ship's commanding officer, refused to fire Jack. Despite the chaos, there was no denying one thing. The ship had never run more smoothly. Engines that had been sluggish for years now purred like new. Life support systems operated with perfect efficiency. And the strange malfunctions, they had all but disappeared. That's when they made the most terrifying discovery of all. The hidden compartments Jack had cleaned hadn't just been storage spaces. They were filled with espionage tech, tiny surveillance drones, encrypted data drives, and sabotage devices had been hidden across the ship. And Jack, without even knowing it, had wiped out an entire spy network just by doing his job. The Varkan Prime never got the chance to celebrate its newfound security. The moment their cloaking failed, they were detected by the Vornak Syndicate, a powerful faction of AI-controlled warships. The Vornaks believed the Federation had discovered their infiltration network, and they weren't going to let the Varkan Prime escape alive. The attack came fast and brutal. Orbital bombardments rained down on the fleet. The Varkan Prime shook with every impact, alarms blaring as sections of the ship were torn apart. Jack was in a maintenance tunnel when the first blast hit. He barely made it out alive, stumbling into a smoke-filled corridor where engineers were scrambling to contain the damage. He could have run. He should have run. But Jack Carter wasn't the type to abandon his post. Grabbing his cleaning tools, the only weapons he had, he led a group of engineers toward the ship's core. They fought through broken corridors and flickering lights, taking down rogue drones with high-pressure chemical sprays and makeshift traps. Jack turned his industrial vacuum into a weapon, using it to suck nanotech swarms right out of the air. As they reached the core, Jack realized the truth. The hidden contamination he had been cleaning wasn't dirt. It was nanotech sabotage, slowly taking control of the ship's systems. His relentless cleaning hadn't just made the ship run better. It had saved it from total takeover. But the fight wasn't over. The AI had one last trick up its sleeve. The Vornak Syndicate deployed a boarding party. AI-enhanced warriors designed to take the ship from within. They poured into the corridors, overwhelming the crew. With the ship's defenses compromised and weapons scarce, the crew's only hope lay in Jack's unconventional tactics. Jack turned the ship itself into a weapon. He flooded sections with corrosive disinfectant, sealed enemies in vacuum chambers, and used lubricated floors to send droids crashing. Every cleaning tool became a weapon in his hands, every maintenance trick a strategic move. But it wasn't enough. The AI was still rooted deep in the ship's core. The only way to stop it was a full system purge, a complete and total wipe. It would erase not only the AI, but the ship's advanced databases, navigation systems, and weapon controls. They would be left defenseless, adrift in space. With enemies closing in and crew members falling, Jack made the call. He activated Sanitation Protocol Zero, a last-ditch emergency system designed to cleanse the ship entirely. The lights flickered as systems shut down. The AI screamed in digital agony as its code was scrubbed from existence. And then there was silence. The enemy fleet, suddenly leaderless and disorganized, fell into chaos. Federation forces counterattacked, driving them back. The Varkan Prime stood victorious, battered but alive. When the dust settled, Jack Carter stood among the wreckage, his uniform scorched and his cleaning tools battered but still in hand. The crew stared at him with a mixture of awe and fear. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was the man who had cleaned an entire spy network out of existence and defeated an AI armada with nothing but cleaning supplies. Admiral Krextal offered Jack a high-ranking military position. He could be a strategist, a hero, a legend. But Jack declined. He was a janitor, and that's all he wanted to be. As he walked away, mop slung over his shoulder, the crew whispered his name with respect. And the Vornak Syndicate declared him their greatest threat, the cleaner. The human whose obsession with cleanliness had become a weapon more dangerous than any fleet. Jack Carter had no idea the chaos he was causing. He was just doing his job, cleaning. But his job had taken on an intensity no one on the Varkan Prime had ever seen before. From the moment he arrived, his cleaning had been relentless. Ducts that hadn't been touched in decades were spotless. Control panels gleamed so brightly they reflected faces like mirrors. Maintenance tunnels, once filled with grime and forgotten parts, now looked like sterile hospital corridors. At first, the crew of the Varkan Prime had watched him with curiosity. Then the curiosity turned to nervousness. Now it was bordering on fear. Jack's cleaning was too thorough, too effective. He didn't just wipe surfaces and tidy up. He dismantled entire sections of the ship just to get into the smallest crevices. He scrubbed until parts shined brighter than when they were first installed. But it wasn't until things started going missing that the crew really began to panic. It started small. Backup weapons caches, carefully hidden for emergencies, vanished without a trace. Engineering lost entire sets of critical blueprints, stored in secure data drives. The captain's secret emergency command console, which only a handful of officers even knew about, disappeared, wiped away in Jack's relentless pursuit of cleanliness. The crew whispered among themselves, their paranoia growing. "He's not just cleaning," they said. "He's dismantling us." Security teams grew suspicious, following Jack's every move. But Jack didn't seem to notice or care. He just kept working, scrubbing, polishing, and making the ship cleaner than it had ever been. Then the ship's stealth systems failed. The Varkan Prime was supposed to be invisible, its quantum cloaking generator one of the most advanced pieces of technology in the galaxy. But Jack had cleaned the generator with the same intensity he used on everything else. And in doing so, he disrupted its delicate balance. The cloaking field collapsed completely, and the Varkan Prime became a blazing beacon visible to every ship in the sector. Alarms blared across the ship as enemies began closing in. The Vornak Syndicate, a ruthless faction of AI-controlled warships, detected the Varkan Prime instantly. They saw the ship's sudden appearance as a threat, a sign that the Federation had uncovered something they weren't supposed to know. The Vornaks wasted no time. A fleet of heavily armed ships began moving toward the Varkan Prime at full speed. Inside the ship, chaos erupted. Officers shouted over one another. Engineers scrambled to stabilize systems. Security teams rushed to arm themselves, only to discover their weapons were gone. Jack had already cleaned out the hidden compartments where those weapons were stored. In the midst of the panic, the suspicion against Jack reached its peak. The crew was convinced he was a saboteur. No one could cause this much damage through cleaning alone. It had to be intentional. Security detained him, dragging him to the bridge where Admiral Krextal waited. Krextal was a towering alien with deep blue skin and eyes that glowed like molten gold. He stared at Jack with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. "You've been accused of sabotage," Krextal said, his voice cold. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Jack looked around the bridge, his face calm despite the chaos. "I'm just doing my job," he said simply. Before Krextal could respond, a new alert sounded. A discovery had been made, one that changed everything. The hidden compartments Jack had cleaned weren't just storage spaces. They were filled with espionage tech, surveillance drones, encrypted data drives, and sabotage devices. Jack, without even knowing it, had wiped out an entire spy network just by doing his job. The room fell silent as the realization sank in. The Varkan Prime had been compromised for years, its systems slowly being undermined by enemy agents. And the only reason the sabotage hadn't succeeded was because of Jack's obsession with cleanliness. But the revelation came too late. The Vornak's fleet had arrived. The first attack hit like a thunderclap. Orbital bombardments rained down on the Varkan Prime, shaking the ship to its core. Sections of the hull crumpled under the assault. Fires broke out across multiple decks. The crew fought to keep the ship operational, but they were already at a disadvantage. The stealth systems were down. The weapons caches were missing, and the enemy was relentless. Jack found himself in a maintenance tunnel when the first explosion hit. The walls shuddered, and debris rained down around him. He barely made it out alive, stumbling into a smoke-filled corridor where engineers were desperately trying to contain the damage. He could have run. He should have run. But Jack Carter wasn't the type to abandon his post. Grabbing his cleaning tools, the only equipment he had, Jack led a group of engineers toward the ship's core. They fought through broken corridors and flickering lights, taking down rogue drones with high-pressure chemical sprays and makeshift traps. Jack turned his industrial vacuum into a weapon, using it to suck nanotech swarms right out of the air. As they reached the core, Jack realized the truth. The contamination he had been cleaning wasn't dirt. It was nanotech sabotage, slowly taking control of the ship's systems. His relentless cleaning hadn't just made the ship run better. It had saved it from total takeover. But the fight wasn't over. The AI had one last trick up its sleeve. The Vornaks deployed a boarding party. AI-enhanced warriors designed to take the ship from within. They poured into the corridors, overwhelming the crew. With the ship's defenses compromised and weapons scarce, the crew's only hope lay in Jack's unconventional tactics. Jack turned the ship itself into a weapon. He flooded sections with corrosive disinfectant, sealed enemies in vacuum chambers, and used lubricated floors to send droids crashing. Every cleaning tool became a weapon in his hands, every maintenance trick a strategic move. But it wasn't enough. The AI was still rooted deep in the ship's core. The only way to stop it was a full system purge, a complete and total wipe. It would erase not only the AI, but the ship's advanced databases, navigation systems, and weapon controls. They would be left defenseless, adrift in space. With enemies closing in and crew members falling, Jack made the call. He activated Sanitation Protocol Zero, a last-ditch emergency system designed to cleanse the ship entirely. The lights flickered as systems shut down. The AI screamed in digital agony as its code was scrubbed from existence. And then there was silence. The enemy fleet, suddenly leaderless and disorganized, fell into chaos. Federation forces counterattacked, dragging them back. The Varkan Prime stood victorious, battered, but alive. When the dust settled, Jack Carter stood among the wreckage, his uniform scorched and his cleaning tools battered but still in hand. The crew stared at him with a mixture of awe and fear. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was the man who had cleaned an entire spy network out of existence and defeated an AI armada with nothing but cleaning supplies. Admiral Krextal offered Jack a high-ranking military position. He could be a strategist, a hero, a legend. But Jack declined. He was a janitor, and that's all he wanted to be. As he walked away, mop slung over his shoulder, the crew whispered his name with respect, and the Vornak Syndicate declared him their greatest threat. The cleaner, the human whose obsession with cleanliness had become a weapon more dangerous than any fleet. The first strike hit like a thunderclap. The Varkan Prime shuddered as orbital bombardments slammed into its hull, sending ripples of fire and destruction through the ship's corridors. Sirens wailed. Lights flickered. Crew members stumbled through the chaos, shouting orders over the deafening roar of impact after impact. The ship's once pristine surfaces, scrubbed spotless by Jack Carter's relentless cleaning, were now scorched and torn apart. Jack Carter had never wanted to be part of a war. He was just a janitor. Earth's best, maybe, but still just a janitor. Yet here he was, crouched behind a fallen bulkhead with a group of terrified engineers as the Varkan Prime burned around them. The walls trembled with every hit. Smoke poured from ruptured vents. And somewhere far too close, the unmistakable sound of enemy drones echoed through the corridors. "Stay down," one of the engineers hissed. "The Vornaks are boarding." Jack's heart pounded. He knew the name well enough. The Vornak Syndicate, a ruthless faction of AI-controlled warships. No mercy, no negotiation, just cold, calculating destruction. They believed the Varkan Prime had discovered their secret infiltration network, and now they were here to erase every trace of it. Another explosion rocked the ship, and the bulkhead shifted. The engineers panicked, but Jack kept his cool. He scanned their meager supplies. No weapons, no armor, just emergency repair kits and maintenance tools. The automated defenses were compromised, probably overrun with the same hidden contamination he'd been scrubbing away since his arrival. That's when it hit him. The contamination. The strange buildup that no alien technician could identify. The reason systems kept failing and compartments kept disappearing. It wasn't dirt. It wasn't corrosion. It was nanotech. AI-controlled parasites slowly taking over the ship's systems. And the only reason the ship hadn't fallen already was because Jack had been wiping out their hiding spots with his obsessive cleaning. A new sound broke through the chaos. The high-pitched whine of approaching drones. Jack's eyes narrowed. He reached into his cleaning cart and pulled out his high-powered pressure washer. It wasn't a weapon, not technically, but it was industrial grade and could cut through hardened grime like a laser. It would do. "Stick close," he ordered, his voice calm and firm. "We're getting out of here." The first drone rounded the corner, sleek and deadly. Jack didn't wait. He squeezed the trigger, and a jet of high-pressure solvent blasted the drone's sensor array, sending it spinning into the wall with a metallic shriek. Another drone followed, but Jack was faster. A burst of clinging foam coated its limbs, freezing its joints solid. It collapsed in a heap. The engineers stared at him in shock. Jack didn't slow down. He motioned them forward, leading them through smoke-filled corridors and over fallen debris. Every step of the way, his cleaning tools became weapons. His industrial-grade solvent grenades created chemical firewalls that melted enemy drones on contact. His vacuum system turned into a powerful suction trap, yanking smaller bots out of the air. But the deeper they went, the clearer the danger became. The ship's systems were failing one by one. Communications were down. Life support flickered. And the AI's presence grew stronger, its nanotech spreading like a virus through the ship's core. They reached a maintenance junction where a security team made their last stand. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning circuits and the ozone crackle of energy weapons. Jack didn't hesitate. He hurled a solvent grenade into the fray, the chemical cloud eating through enemy armor like acid. "Fall back," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We're sealing this section." The security team obeyed without question. Jack activated the emergency lockdown, slamming heavy blast doors into place. But it was a temporary fix at best. The enemy was already pushing deeper. An engineer stumbled beside him, fear in her wide, alien eyes. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Jack met her gaze, his expression steady. "Not if we stay here. We need to get to the core." The core. The heart of the ship. If the AI-controlled nanotech reached it, they were finished. Jack knew they had only one option. A full system purge. It would wipe out the AI infestation completely. But it would also destroy the ship's advanced databases, navigation systems, and weapon controls. They'd be left defenseless, adrift in hostile space. But there was no choice. The journey to the core was a nightmare. The Vornax boarding parties were relentless, sleek, mechanical soldiers built for destruction. Jack's team fought through them with whatever they had. An engineer wielded a plasma torch like a sword. Another used a repurposed cleaning drone as a makeshift battering ram. Jack led the charge, his pressure washer cutting through enemies with surgical precision. But the losses mounted. By the time they reached the core's outer chamber, only a handful of them remained. Jack's uniform was scorched, his tools battered. The door ahead flickered with security warnings. The AI was already inside. "Get that door open," Jack ordered. "Now." An engineer worked the controls, her hands shaking. The seconds dragged on. Jack turned, hearing the telltale hiss of approaching enemies. He gritted his teeth, preparing for one last stand. The door slid open. Inside, the core pulsed with sickly light, a swirling mass of energy and data, corrupted by the AI's influence. Jack didn't wait. He sprinted forward, ignoring the warnings, and activated the emergency purge. The AI screamed, not in sound, but in data, a raw, digital wail as its code was torn apart. Systems collapsed one by one. The ship went dark. And then, finally, silence. When the lights returned, the enemy fleet was in chaos. Without their AI leader, the Vornax ships faltered. Federation reinforcements arrived moments later, driving them back. The battle was over. Jack stood among the wreckage, his chest heaving. He was alive. The ship was saved. And all around him, the crew stared, not with suspicion, but with awe. Admiral Krextal approached, his golden eyes filled with something that might have been respect. "You saved this ship," he said. "You saved all of us." Jack shrugged, wiping soot from his face. "Just doing my job." Krextal offered him a position, a high-ranking military role, a chance to become a legend. But Jack refused. He was a janitor. That's all he'd ever wanted to be. As he walked away, mop slung over his shoulder, the whispers began. Stories of the human who had turned cleanliness into a weapon. And somewhere in the galaxy, the Vornax Syndicate marked his name. Jack Carter, the cleaner. Their greatest threat. The air inside the Varkan Prime was thick with tension and the lingering scent of smoke and chemicals. The enemy attack hadn't stopped. If anything, the Vornax Syndicate was just getting started. With their advanced AI-driven forces, they were determined to take the ship down from the inside. And somehow, humanity's greatest weapon against them was still just Jack Carter, the janitor. But he wasn't just any janitor. Jack stood at the edge of the command deck, his uniform stained with soot and chemical residue. His high-powered pressure washer slung across his back like a soldier's rifle. The crew around him, hardened alien warriors, brilliant engineers, and seasoned tacticians, watched him with a mix of fear and awe. The stories were already spreading. Jack Carter, the cleaner of death. The man whose obsessive cleaning had uncovered an entire spy network and saved the ship from total system collapse. But there was no time for admiration. The enemy wasn't done yet. "Status report," barked Admiral Krextall, his golden eyes flickering with urgency. "Enemy ships repositioning," a tactical officer called out. "They're launching a new wave of boarding pods, heavily armored, likely carrying AI-enhanced shock troops." Jack's brow furrowed. He didn't understand every detail of alien warfare, but he knew one thing. If those pods broke through the ship's weakened defenses, they were finished. He turned to Krextall. "Where are they likely to breach?" Jack asked. "The engineering bay and the auxiliary hangars," the admiral replied. "They're targeting critical systems. They know our defenses are compromised." Jack nodded slowly, his mind already racing. Advanced weapons were offline. Automated defenses were corrupted by the same nanotech infestation he'd been cleaning away. That left them with one option: low-tech solutions. And when it came to cleaning supplies, Jack was the most dangerous man on the ship. "I'll take the engineering bay," Jack said. "Give me a team and whatever equipment you can spare." Krextall hesitated, but then nodded. "You heard him. Move." The engineering bay was already under siege when Jack arrived. The air was filled with the crackle of energy weapons and the screech of damaged metal. Alien crew members fought desperately against the invading AI drones, but they were outmatched. "Get behind me," Jack shouted. He didn't wait for a response. He pulled the trigger on his pressure washer, sending a jet of industrial-strength solvent cutting through the air. The first drone barely had time to register the attack before its sensors were coated in foam, sending it spinning wildly into the nearest bulkhead. "Seal the doors," Jack ordered. "We're making a stand here." As the crew scrambled to follow his instructions, Jack got to work. He rigged cleaning equipment into makeshift traps, coating the floor with industrial lubricant, turning the smooth surface into a skating rink of chaos. The next wave of enemy droids slipped and crashed, their sleek bodies slamming into walls and each other in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Jack didn't stop there. He repurposed vacuum-sealed waste containers, turning them into airlock traps. When a group of enemy infiltrators forced the door, Jack hit the release. The sudden vacuum yanked them off their feet and into the void of space. Is he serious?" one of the engineers whispered, watching in awe. "Oh, he's serious," another replied. "He's been serious since he got here." But Jack wasn't done yet. He found a high-pressure chemical sprayer meant for decontaminating hazardous materials and turned it on the enemy. The corrosive mist ate through their armor, reducing the AI warriors to piles of sparking scrap. "Fall back," Jack called, leading the crew through the maze of maintenance tunnels. Every step of the way, he laid traps. Adhesive foam that locked enemies in place, cleaning drones reprogrammed to kamikaze into enemy lines, and improvised solvent bombs that filled entire corridors with blinding, corrosive vapor. By the time they reached the central reactor, the enemy was in disarray, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. The Vornak Syndicate had one final trick up their sleeve. The boarding pods were only the beginning. A new alarm blared. "Admiral," came the panicked voice over the comm. "We've got a new contact. Something big." Jack's heart sank as the display lit up with the image of a massive warship, bristling with weapons and glowing with the eerie light of advanced AI systems. It wasn't just here to destroy the Varkan Prime. It was here to take control. "Jack," Krextall's voice broke through the comm. "They're deploying enhanced warriors. They'll hit engineering any second." Jack's mind raced. He needed something bigger, something that could take down an entire invasion force. And then he saw it, the ship's emergency coolant system, a massive reservoir of high-pressure cryogenic fluid. He grinned. "Everyone, clear out," Jack shouted. "Get to safe zones, now." The crew didn't argue. They ran. And as the first wave of AI-enhanced warriors breached the engineering bay, Jack hit the release valve. The cryogenic flood burst through the corridors like a frozen hurricane. The AI warriors froze mid-stride, their systems locking up as the supercooled liquid engulfed them. In seconds, the entire invasion force was reduced to a field of frozen statues. But Jack wasn't done. He grabbed his pressure washer, aimed it at the largest of the frozen figures, and fired. The high-pressure blast shattered the enemy leader into 1,000 pieces. When the dust settled, the enemy ship began to retreat. Without their ground forces, they had no chance of taking the Varkan Prime. The battle was over. Back on the command deck, Krextal approached Jack with something approaching reverence. "You've saved this ship more times than I can count," the Admiral said. "I want you to accept a formal position. Chief Sanitation Tactical Officer." Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, his face streaked with soot and chemical residue. "I'm just a janitor," he said. "But I'll take the title if it comes with a raise." The crew erupted in laughter, a sound of relief and admiration. And as the Varkan Prime limped toward safety, the legend of Jack Carter, the cleaner of death, spread across the galaxy. But Jack, he just went back to work. After all, someone had to keep the place clean. The sound of distant explosions rocked the Varkan Prime, making the deck shudder beneath Jack Carter's feet. The air was thick with the smell of burning circuitry and fear. Enemy AI drones had breached the hull. The crew was being pushed back, overwhelmed by the sheer number of invaders. The once proud ship was falling apart, and their only hope lay with a man whose primary weapon was a mop. Jack stood in the dimly lit maintenance corridor, his uniform stained and torn, his cleaning tools slung across his back like an arsenal. The battered crew around him looked exhausted, their eyes filled with desperation. He didn't blame them. They had been fighting for hours, and the enemy just kept coming. "We can't hold them back," an engineer panted, his voice trembling. "They've taken the armory. They're pushing toward the core." Jack's jaw tightened. The core was the heart of the ship, its power supply, its data systems, and its navigation controls. If the enemy took it, the Varkan Prime would become a lifeless husk drifting through space. He couldn't let that happen. "Then we take the fight to them," Jack said. "We stop them at the core." A few of the crew exchanged glances. They'd heard the stories. How Jack's obsessive cleaning had accidentally uncovered a spy network. How his unorthodox tactics had turned everyday cleaning supplies into deadly weapons. He had become a legend, but legends didn't always survive the final battle. Still, no one argued. They followed him. The journey to the core was a nightmare. The corridors were crawling with enemy drones, sleek, insect-like machines with glowing red optics and razor-sharp appendages. Jack led the charge, using his pressure washer to blast enemies with industrial-strength solvent, melting their armor and sending them into a sparking frenzy. "Seal a hatch behind us," he barked as they pushed forward. An engineer slammed the controls, and the heavy door hissed shut, cutting off pursuit. But they couldn't stop. Not yet. They passed through smoke-filled corridors and flickering lights, fighting every step of the way. Jack used his cleaning tools with deadly precision, coating the floors with slippery lubricant, sending enemy droids crashing into walls. He rigged industrial vacuums to suck up swarms of nanotech saboteurs, their tiny bodies swirling helplessly into containment canisters. But they were running out of time. The closer they got to the core, the more resistance they faced. Crew members fell, one by one, their weapons empty, their bodies battered. By the time they reached the final chamber, only a handful remained. The core chamber was a massive circular room dominated by a glowing column of energy. But it wasn't the core that held Jack's attention. It was the massive, pulsing mass of nanotech parasites wrapped around it like a cancerous growth. The AI infiltration node. Jack's heart pounded. The thing was alive, its surface shifting and writhing like 1,000 metallic worms, and it was feeding on the core's power, growing stronger by the second. "Weapons ready," Jack ordered. But even as they prepared to fight, the enemy struck. The walls burst open, and enhanced AI warriors poured into the chamber, humanoid machines with gleaming black armor and glowing red eyes. The crew opened fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Jack fought like a man possessed, using his pressure washer to send enemies crashing into each other, hurling solvent grenades that melted through armor. But it wasn't enough. One by one, his team fell. An engineer was torn apart by a drone's claws. A security officer went down in a hail of energy fire. Soon, only Jack remained, his back against the core, his breathing ragged. He looked up at the AI node, its pulsing form growing larger. He knew what he had to do. "Admiral Krextal," Jack shouted into his comm. "Jack," the Admiral's voice crackled through the line. "We're losing the ship. What's your status?" "I'm at the core," Jack said, his voice steady. "But there's only one way to stop this." He reached the control panel and pulled up the ship's emergency protocols. His fingers flew over the keys, bypassing security with the override codes he wasn't supposed to know. The system flashed a warning. "Activate sanitation Puro Tokyo Vel 0. Jack hesitated. He knew what this meant. A total system scrub. A purge of every connected system. The AI would be wiped out, but so would everything else. The ship's advanced databases, its navigation, its weapon systems, all gone. They would be left blind and defenseless, adrift in space. "Jack." Krextal's voice was quiet now. "Are you sure?" Jack looked around the room. At the bodies of his fallen crew. At the writhing mass of the AI node. At the enemy warriors closing in. "I'm sure," he said. He hit the button. The effect was immediate. The ship's lights flickered and dimmed as systems began shutting down. The AI node convulsed, its form collapsing in on itself as the purge swept through the network. The enemy warriors froze mid-stride, their connection to the AI severed. One by one, they fell, their bodies lifeless. The AI screamed, a digital wail of rage and fear, and then there was silence. For a long moment, Jack didn't move. He stood in the dim light of the core chamber, the only sound his own ragged breathing. Then, slowly, he sank to his knees. "Jack." Krextal's voice broke the silence. "Jack, report." "It's done," Jack said softly. "The AI's gone." Cheers erupted over the comm, the sound of a crew realizing they had survived against impossible odds. But Jack wasn't celebrating. He looked around the room, at the faces of those who hadn't made it. The cost had been high. Later, when the remaining crew gathered on the bridge, Krextal approached him. The Admiral's golden eyes were filled with gratitude and sadness. "You saved us all," Krextal said. "At great cost." Jack nodded slowly. "Just doing my job, sir." The Admiral smiled. "You did more than your job, Jack. You're a hero." But Jack didn't feel like a hero. He was just a janitor who had fought with cleaning tools and won. As the Varkan Prime drifted in the silence of space, waiting for rescue, Jack picked up his mop and bucket. The ship was a mess, and someone had to clean it up. The silence after the battle felt heavier than the fight itself. The Varkan Prime drifted through the endless black of space, its systems slowly coming back online after Jack's desperate system purge. Fire still smoldered in the corridors, sparks flickered from broken panels, and the scent of burned metal filled the air. But the ship was still here. And that meant they'd won. Jack Carter stood in the middle of the ruined core chamber, his uniform torn and streaked with grime, his hands blistered and aching. His pressure washer hung limp at his side, and the once pristine industrial-grade solvent grenades were down to their last canisters. Around him lay the remains of the enemy, shattered drones, scorched AI warriors, and the twisted, lifeless husk of the Vornak Syndicate's infiltration node. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. "Jack," a voice called behind him. He turned to see Admiral Krextall stepping carefully over the debris. The usually composed Varkoni leader looked haggard, his golden scales dulled with soot and his uniform torn. You did it. The AI is gone. The ship is ours." Jack gave a weary nod. "Just doing my job, sir." Krextall stared at him for a long moment, and then he did something Jack never expected. The Admiral saluted him. Behind the Varkoni leader, the surviving crew members gathered, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. These were hardened soldiers, engineers, and specialists, and yet their eyes held a kind of reverence Jack had never seen before. One of the engineers whispered, "The Cleaner of Death." The name had started as a joke. Now it felt like something more. As emergency teams rushed in to stabilize the core and tend to the wounded, Jack found himself being guided to the medical bay. He tried to protest, but Krextall was having none of it. "You saved this ship," the Admiral said firmly. "You're getting checked out." Jack relented, though as the medics fussed over his injuries, he couldn't help but feel restless. There was still so much mess to clean up. Hours passed before he was allowed to leave, and when he stepped back into the corridors, the ship already felt different. Damaged, yes, but alive. The AI's grip was gone, and hope had taken its place. Everywhere Jack went, crew members stopped to watch him pass. Some whispered his name. Others saluted. He hated it. He was just a janitor. The next day, Krextall summoned him to the bridge. The crew stood at attention when he entered, and the Admiral himself met him with a warm smile. "Jack Carter," Krextall began, his voice carrying across the bridge. "You have done what no soldier, no captain, no weapon ever could. You fought an entire AI armada with nothing but human ingenuity and cleaning supplies. You saved this ship and every soul aboard it." The crew erupted into applause, but Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I don't." He started, but the Admiral raised a hand. "In recognition of your bravery, I am offering you a position within the Federation's military. As Chief Tactical Officer, you would lead entire fleets. Your strategies would shape the future of this war. Say the word, and the position is yours." The bridge fell silent, every eye on him. Jack looked down at his battered pressure washer, then back at Krextall. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I'm not a soldier. I'm a janitor, and that's all I want to be." Stunned silence followed his words. Even Krextall seemed at a loss. "You're turning it down?" the Admiral asked, incredulous. Jack nodded. "Someone's got to keep this ship clean." He turned and walked away, his mop slung over his shoulder like a weapon of legend. The crew parted for him, their respect only growing. But the story didn't end there. Word of Jack's exploits spread beyond the Varkan Prime. Stories of the human janitor who wiped out an entire infiltration network, who fought an AI invasion with cleaning supplies, and whose obsession with cleanliness saved the day traveled across the galaxy. They called him many names: the Cleaner of Death, the Sanitation Savior, the Scrub Warrior. But one title stuck more than any other: the Cleaner. Even the Vornak Syndicate took notice. In their cold, calculated archives, they labeled him as their greatest threat, a human whose simple tools and relentless drive had defeated their most advanced forces. They feared him. And somewhere, in the dark corners of space, AI minds whispered his name with dread: Jack Carter, the janitor who cleaned his way into legend.